Hamas has put Israel in a lose-lose position, where Israel will face extremely complicated challenges in its coming fight against Hamas and Gaza, where it could spark a wider war. Let's discuss how and why this happened. We'll discuss why this is all happening now of all times at the end of this video. For now, we're just going to discuss the strategic situation. No matter how you chop it up, the attacks on October 7th were a complete and total surprise for Israel, and involved a level of sheer brutality that Israel hasn't witnessed in its modern history. To this point, Israel has worked to establish an image of an unbeatable, unfazed giant with eyes everywhere that kept the Israeli state safe. From the perspective of Hamas, this had to be challenged, especially if it was going to motivate other groups in the region to join in a larger fight against Israel. When Hamas launched its attack, it did so with enough force to shock not only Israel, but the world, with its level of sophistication and size. The attack involved thousands of fighters who were able to infiltrate Israel and get into towns and military installations that Israel believed were protected. Once they got into those towns, they began a rampage, killing, raping, kidnapping, and mutilating men, women, and children alike. The accounts of what has happened are horrifying, and Hamas fighters not only proudly live-stream these acts online, the Israeli military has brought the media into these towns after they were recaptured to show the world an uncensored and untouched picture of the events that transpired. The attacks on October 7th were the bloodiest in Israeli modern history, catching every corner of the Israeli government by complete surprise, and shaking the Israeli people to their core. A response unlike any other would be required if Israel is to regain its image as an unbeatable giant, a response that may take Israel into the Gaza Strip to destroy Hamas once and for all. Before the end of the 7th, Hamas released statements claiming that they had shown that Israel was not invincible and could be beaten. In the eyes of Hamas, the attack was a success, and even as the weekend passed and Israel mobilized, with thousands of Hamas fighters being killed and the fighting that ensued, Hamas may have actually succeeded in its attacks in a broader sense. Yes, its attacks succeeded in infiltrating fighters throughout Israel and inflicting horrendous damage on the people of Israel, but they may have succeeded in a broader, more strategic objective of forcing Israel to invade Gaza. Israel and Hamas have fought plenty of skirmishes in the past, with the most intense fighting ultimately leading to Israeli airstrikes on Gaza, but no sizable land incursion. Israel has a few reasons to avoid a land incursion into Gaza, which is likely why they've refrained from doing so to this point, and why Hamas believed it would take an attack so daring and shocking to actually lure Israel in. The first reason Israel has avoided sending troops into Gaza in force is the environment. Gaza is one of the most densely populated areas on Earth, with over 2 million inhabitants in just a 141 square mile area, surrounded by Israel and the ocean on 3 fronts, and just a narrow border with Egypt. If Gaza were considered a country, it would be the 3rd most densely populated country in the world. For Israel, any airstrike in Gaza, specifically in Gaza City, carries a heavy risk of civilian collateral damage. Pair the density with Hamas's known TTPs of hiding among the civilian population and infrastructure, and you can begin to see how, if Israel wants to target Hamas, civilians will be on the crossfire. This gives Hamas opportunities in the information space to show how Israel is willing to kill Palestinian people and to use every airstrike as a propaganda tool and win against Israel. This has led to an Israeli tactic called roof knocking, where Israel drops a small explosive on the roof of a building it plans to destroy as a warning to those inside that it will be destroyed and those inside should be evacuated. However, this is still imperfect, as civilians are often still caught in the area when the strike occurs. The second reason Israel has avoided sending troops into Gaza is the backlash that it would face in the region. Palestine commands significant support across the Middle East, with nearly every neighbor of Israel opposing Israeli occupation and treatment of what they view as Palestinian territory. Groups like Hezbollah, which operate north in neighboring Lebanon and Syria, strongly support Hamas and have openly threatened Israel that it would enter the war if Israel invades Gaza. On a national level, nearly every country in the Middle East has warned Israel against invading Gaza. Should Israel invade, it knows it will be risking the conflict spreading into a wider regional war. The third reason Israel has avoided invading Gaza is the significant cost to its forces as a result of the 2 reasons we've already discussed. Fighting in a densely populated, heavily urbanized area against a non-uniformed enemy that's capable of blending in with civilians and has strong support from that civilian population is an extremely difficult and costly task. It's a task that is is not accomplished overnight. Rather, it becomes something that lasts months or even years. When the United States invaded Iraq in 2003, few would have imagined that US forces would become engaged in a fight against a similarly invisible enemy for years. And this is especially true for Afghanistan. In both of those cases, the fight was spread out in large, open countries, which had densely populated areas, but also plenty of room where the fight could be isolated and controlled. Israel has few options available to consolidate this fight, and none of their options are good ones. One of the first tasks that Israel did to set the battlefield was to initiate a siege of Gaza, cutting it off from food, water, and power. This directly impacts the civilian population, which already supported Hamas, but with conditions drastically deteriorating, support for Hamas will likely increase. Israel also began its air campaign, destroying buildings it says were being used by Hamas. As I mentioned before, these buildings weren't only used by Hamas, but also by civilians, which again plays into Hamas's information campaigns against Israel. Thus far, in the days that have passed since the war began, the air campaign has been devastating, with entire blocks being reduced to ruin and hundreds of thousands of Palestinians being displaced. On October 10th, Hamas turned up the heat, claiming it would kill hostages and live stream the executions online for every airstrike Israel launches without a warning. Thus far, as of the time of recording, these executions have not yet happened, indicating Hamas recognizes roof knocking as a valid warning. With Israel's siege of Gaza, its relentless air campaign, and the anticipation of a ground invasion, Palestinians caught in the middle have nowhere to flee. Egypt, which controls the only other boarding crossing with Gaza, has kept the border closed, eager to prevent a surge in refugees into the Sinai. This too plays into Hamas's goals. If Israel invades and a humanitarian corridor cannot be established, the likelihood of even more civilian casualties will skyrocket, as Israeli soldiers will flood into Gaza, angered by atrocities of October 7th. Many of these troops will be reservists, activated during the Israeli call-up following the attacks. And while reservists are trained, they may lack similar levels of discipline as their active counterparts. And in a complex environment like Gaza, accidents and atrocities alike are bound to happen. And watching closely, ready to exploit each one and show the world, and more importantly their Arab supporters, how evil Israel is Hamas. There are challenges to creating a humanitarian corridor as well. First and foremost is the location that these refugees will go, and for how long they'll be there, as well as who will sustain them. Potentially hundreds of thousands of people will need a lot of space, a lot of food and water, a lot of electricity, and other support like medical care, sanitation, education, and security. There may be plenty of countries willing to provide these things, but the next issue will be transporting these refugees to their respective locations. Next is the question of filtering refugees from Hamas fighters and agents. This will be a primary concern for Israel as it seeks to find and destroy Hamas in entirety. In Israel's mind, Hamas cannot be allowed to survive and metastasize in refugee camps. A shell-shocked and homeless people will become a fertile recruiting ground for extremist groups like Hamas or Hezbollah, ensuring that this war will not end with the invasion of Gaza. Finally is the question of resettlement. After decades of on-again and off-again conflict, and what would likely be the complete destruction of Gaza City, would Israel even be willing to resettle the Palestinian refugees back into Gaza once the war is over? Furthermore, would the refugees themselves want to go back? Even if they did return to Gaza, would they be returning to an area that's even livable? Once again, resettled refugees returning to their destroyed home offers more recruitment opportunities for extremist groups, again threatening whatever peace that follows this war. All of these challenges put Israel in a lose-lose situation. It has to respond to the attacks of October 7th. Even if it tried not to respond, it would result in significant anger from the shocked Israeli people, and would give Hamas the propaganda win it tried to claim on October 7th. Israel, the military juggernaut, was beaten and didn't even respond, as Hamas would likely claim. This would open the door for even more attacks, as concern for the Israeli response would be viewed as something that could be tolerated or even withstood, and something that would not threaten the existence of Palestine or even Hamas. Should Israel respond with a ground invasion, the challenges discussed would create opportunity after opportunity for Hamas to broadcast Israeli mistakes. Groups like Hezbollah may very well make good on their promise to engage in the war once the ground invasion begins, already putting Israel in a two-front conflict against two well-equipped and supported groups. As the fighting goes on though, there is the open question of what other regional actors choose to do. Groups like Iran and Syria, which are no friends of Israel, may seek opportunities to continue to support Hamas and Hezbollah, Hezbollah, seeking to pin Israel in a military quagmire it cannot win. Other countries like Saudi Arabia and Egypt, which were seeking normalization with Israel, may backtrack on those goals, sending Israel back decades in terms of diplomacy. With all of this, Israel is not alone, with the US moving a carrier strike group into the eastern Mediterranean. Statements by the US government indicate that the US would join the war if Hezbollah attacked Israel, though the extent of that involvement may not extend beyond just airstrikes and special forces support. The US is also working regionally to open a humanitarian corridor for Palestinians in Gaza. However, this will bear monitoring and execution. Overall, US involvement in this conflict will also bear monitoring, as well as any involvement of outside actors like Syria, Iran, or anyone else. If you're interested in why this war is happening now of all times, check out this video. Leave a comment with your thoughts as well as anything you found interesting. Until next time.